Welcome to Becoming Limitless. This is the podcast for entrepreneurs who want to optimize their brain and their body with biohacking. I'm going to teach you how to eliminate brain fog and upgrade your health so you can have more productivity, energy, and growth in your business. I'm your host, Tanessa Shears. Let's jump in. Welcome back to the Becoming Limitless podcast. I have a fun episode for you today. We're talking all about biohacking your recovery. Specifically, we're talking about your heart rate. We are going to get nerdy. You are going to learn some really cool things about your heart rate, and you'll be wondering, why the heck wasn't I using my heart rate before to help me guide not only my workouts, but my recovery, how I'm feeling, all of that. Because, I work with entrepreneurs all the time, and I hear from you guys, and it's I just wake up feeling so tired. I dread waking up. I don't want to hear my alarm clock go off. I hear this from you guys, and we're never feeling well rested. Well, sleep is one of those things. We know I love to talk about sleep here, but specifically, we're talking about how you can use recovery during your sleep because this is sleep's job. This week, we're going to be learning all about how you can use your sleeping heart rate as information to tell you why you're waking up so tired. So, what I'm going to be teaching you guys today, there's going to be a ton of practical stuff. Honestly, whether you have a sleep tracker like an Oura Ring or a Fitbit or you don't, I promise there are going to be a ton of action strategies, takeaways, and you are going to be looking at your day entirely different in terms of maybe this has been why I've been waking up tired the whole time. And I have a fun story about how I got into learning about heart rate. Well, obviously I did my undergrad in kinesiology, so I had a lot of experience, with taking heart rates and learning about it during that time. But prior to that, I was a lifeguard, and taking your pulse and understanding heart rate had a totally different meaning. So as a lifeguard, we are formally trained. We have to go through a bajillion trainings every year. And we have to obviously take pulse as part of our assessment, especially if someone was found unconscious or, under the water, or just making sure someone is, if they're not too overheated from sitting in the sauna too long. Point being, during all of the trainings we had to do, we had to learn to take heart rate, but nobody knew this at the time except for my family. But I had this really weird phobia, and I was going through this phobia for, probably 6 or 8 years. I just freaked out if someone touched my wrists. I'm talking full on panic attacks. And I don't get them as much anymore because I've been doing so much work on biohacking and managing my anxiety and stress. But I used to have full on panic attacks. To the point where I would hyperventilate, oversweat, and then pass out. And I've actually had this happen to me since I was probably 8 or 10 the first time I had a full panic attack and passed out. But having said that, whenever someone used to touch my wrists, it would set off a panic attack. Don't ask me why. I also don't have this problem anymore. But when I enrolled in lifeguard training, they had to take your pulse. It was part of what we call our simulation or our sims, right? And we'd pretend to be, unconscious. And then the other students in the class would be the pretend lifeguards and come over and assess the situation and check your breathing and take your pulse. And I would lay there pretending to be the victim. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, they're going to touch my wrist. I'm going to freak out. It's going to be so embarrassing. I'm going to throw up everywhere. And I remember having these silent panic attacks every time someone would touch my wrist and try to take my pulse, because we're all beginners in that class and you're just poking around at my wrist. And I was like, oh, I'm so thankful that I don't have this anymore. Couldn't even tell you what the heck caused it or what got rid of it. But fun fact about me, I used to completely freak out and even throw up if someone would touch my wrist. So needless to say, my journey with heart rate has been a little bit rocky, but I'm over it now. And heart rate is something that I actually look at my heart rate every single morning when I wake up because it gives you so much information. So your heart rate, we're going to make it simple. It's how many times your heart beats every single minute, right? It's beats per minute. And it is an indication of how hard your heart or your body has to work. So the harder or the faster your heart rate is, obviously the harder your body is working. Think about when you are exercising and your heart rate goes up, right? It's working really hard to supply your body with the blood that it needs to keep your body oxygenated during the workouts, right? So even though this episode I'm going to be giving you is, like I said, it's all going to be database and super interesting, the tips that I'm going to share with you are still relevant no matter if you have a tracker or not. So if you're like, I don't know how to measure my heart rate, I don't have a fancy device like you, I've got you covered, because there are so many lifestyle changes that you can still make no matter what. So if you don't have a tracker, you can actually take your pulse on your own. So you do it by taking your pointer finger and your middle finger, and you can take it in one of two spots. One of them is on your neck, and that's called your carotid pulse. So that is, how do I describe it? If you find the corner of your jawbone and then drop down about 1 inch to 2 inches, and you lightly press in there, that's your carotid pulse that you're going to feel there. Alternatively, you can take the one on your wrist. So it is going to be on the thumb side of the underside of your wrist. So if you find that middle line, if you're standing there with your palm facing you, if you find that middle line down your wrist, you want to go to the thumb side, and that is where your pulse is going to be. But it's super important, if you're going to be taking your pulse, do not use your thumb. Your thumb has its own pulse, and it can confuse what you're actually feeling. So use your pointer finger and your middle finger. So when we're talking about the data for your resting heart rate and what we're going to be finding important, there are 3 things that we look at that give us data about your recovery and why you're waking up feeling so tired. Number 1 is you're looking at the average heart rate while you are at rest or sleeping, meaning obviously our heart rate fluctuates up and down all throughout the night. You're looking at that average number as your average resting heart rate. That's variable number 1 we're going to look at. Variable number 2 is what was the lowest your heart rate got all night. That can provide a ton of value. And 3, how does your resting heart rate change throughout the night? So like I said, there's a ton of things that go on in our sleep that cause our heart rate to go up and down and up and down. How does it change throughout the night? All right. So normal resting heart rate, and when I say resting, it just means, at sleep, at rest, fully, you're hanging out, you're chill. It's on average between 60 to 100 beats per minute for most people, but the more fit and athletic you are, the lower it is going to go. Athletes, for example, can be as low as 40. And I know professional cyclist Lance Armstrong has a resting heart rate of 32. And I actually, just for this podcast episode, I was so curious. I went into Guinness Book of World Records. The lowest resting heart rate ever recorded is 27 beats per minute. That is less than half of the average lowest resting heart rate. And that was by a guy named Martin Brady. I thought that was insane. 27 is so low. So what does a lower resting heart rate actually mean? It just basically means your heart is more efficient at pumping blood around your body. And if your heart is fitter and you are a healthier individual, it can pump more blood per minute. And that's called your stroke volume, how much blood gets ejected from your heart every single beat. And the more blood you can shoot out of your heart with every beat, the less it actually needs to pump to do the same job. And the less hard your heart has to work, the healthier it's going to be long term. So we really love low resting heart rates. And today, specifically, like I said, we're focusing on resting heart rate because it is a key metric in recovery. But before we jump into all the actionable stuff today, have you left a review for the Becoming Limitless podcast yet? If you haven't, I honestly would be so thankful if you could take 30 seconds and leave a review on iTunes of what you've learned, what you love, everything that you find helpful about this podcast, because when you leave reviews, it signals to iTunes that, hey, this podcast is awesome. Let's share it with other people. And I love to reach other entrepreneurs just like you and help them, really stay focused at work and optimize their brain. And one of the ways we're going to do that is by talking about heart rate recovery. So if you could take 10 seconds and leave me a quick review on iTunes, I would be so thankful. So you might be asking, what the heck does this all have to do with my business? Well, I want you to tell me, how does your day in your business go when you are feeling groggy and tired all day, when you have brain fog that won't quit? I'm going to tell you, for me, if I wake up feeling groggy, I just feel like I want to skip part of the day. I don't like doing the harder stuff. I don't feel as creative or motivated. My thinking isn't as clear. I'm easily distracted. And all of this means I get less high quality work done. I like getting stuff done in my day so that I can shut down at the end of the day and be like, I'm done. I don't need to think about this when I'm hanging out with my family. I don't need to let this be stressing me out because I got done when I needed to get done. And I know that I was working at my peak effort. So that's a reason why I really value my recovery, because I know how much it actually affects my business. And that groggy feeling you're feeling in the morning might be due to actually what your heart rate is doing while you sleep. Now, if we're talking about devices that you can wear, like Fitbit trackers and Oura rings and Apple watches and all of that kind of stuff, they all record this data differently. So you're going to have to look at your device and kind of see what data it spits out. For me, I have a Fitbit and an Oura ring, and my Fitbit records my average resting heart rate while I am asleep. It also produces a graph, but the graphs aren't the best because for some reason, Fitbit splits the graphs into the day before and the day after, like it divides it at midnight onto 2 separate days. So it's hard to see the graph of how my heart rate changes throughout the night. But my Oura ring has been fantastic for it because it not only provides my average resting heart rate during the night, it also provides my lowest resting heart rate, which is a feature that many devices don't actually offer. And it gives a graph. So I'm getting a ton of information on there. And our bodies all have different resting heart rates, and they hover around our personal baseline. So every single one of us has different resting heart rates that are perfect for us. So it is super important to know, don't compare your resting heart rate to your friends or your colleagues or anything like that. I want you just to look at yours and ask yourself, what is this data telling me? Because if we're looking at our baseline resting heart rate, so that's the average heart rate at sleep that we're getting over 2 weeks, if we are getting values like heart rates during the night that are less than our baseline, it means your body is recovering well and your body is ready to jump into the next day's activities. Now, if you're looking at your resting heart rate and it is higher, then something is stressing you out or your body out and you are not recovering. And I mean, this could also be a good stress, like if you're really excited for something coming up, but chances are in the entrepreneurs I've worked with, there is a negative stressor somehow going on. And we're going to talk all about those. And if you have a resting heart rate that is abnormally high, it means something is challenging your body and you need to pay attention. This is not the time to go have a crazy hard workout. This is the time to check in with your body. Now, your resting heart rate is controlled by your autonomic nervous system, which is a branch of your nervous system. I mean, we've got tons of nerves all over the body. But specifically, when we're talking about the autonomic nervous system, it's divided into 2 branches, and you've already heard of these. You have the parasympathetic nervous system, which you might have heard of as the rest and digest, the nice relaxed, nervous system response, or fight or flight. I know we've heard of that one, and it is called our sympathetic nervous system response, right? It's when our body is, under stress and it's preparing to run or fight to protect us, right? So this is the branch that controls this. So we're going to go over all the different factors that can play into this. But before you make any changes to your health, specifically if you're trying to target your resting heart rate, it might be a good idea to talk to your doctor, especially if your heart rate is at the higher end of the range. We said that 60 to 100 is totally normal. If your resting heart rate while you're at rest or sleeping is up around 100, it might just be a nice thing to check in. Last thing is, it's also really important to make sure you're tracking your resting heart rate over a longer period of time instead of taking numbers from just one day of data and making decisions on them. So we're tracking your baseline over 2 weeks. And while the average is good to know, like I said, seeing how your resting heart rate changes during the night provides a ton of valuable information. Like, picture this. Your heart rate is changing throughout the night and it's producing a graph. Sometimes it goes up a bit, sometimes it goes down, then it really drops down, then it goes up. One of the most valuable pieces is actually when you hit your lowest heart rate during the middle of the night. So we're going to be talking all about heart rate patterns during the night and what they can tell you about what you might be doing wrong with your night routine so that you can fix them so you're not waking up feeling so groggy. So or watching for day-to-day changes. Now, how are we doing this? If you have some kind of tracking device, that makes it really simple, right? But if you do not have your tracking device with you, or you don't have one, you can actually do this by measuring your resting heart rate first thing in the morning. So when you're laying in bed, let's say you just opened up your eyes, you haven't got up yet. Like I said, you can take one of those 2 pulses I talked about, your carotid pulse in your neck or your radial pulse in your arm. And what I want you to do is time how many beats you feel your pulse beat in 15 seconds, and then times that number by 4, because there are 60 seconds in a minute, right? Divided by 4 is 15 seconds. So I'm going to get you to figure out what your heart rate is before you get out of bed in the morning, and let's count that as your resting heart rate if you don't have a device. You can then just honestly go into Excel or even plot it on some good old graph paper like we did in high school and make a graph of what your resting heart rate is every single morning, and use that to establish not only your baseline, but how things are changing from day to day. Now, if you have a device, but it doesn't produce a graph for you, you can use the average resting heart rate that it gives you and also make your own graph so you can see what your heart rate is doing. And like we said, we want to make a baseline of 2 weeks before we actually be like, okay, that's my average. That makes sense. This is a deviation, because you can't really tell a deviation if you don't have a control baseline. All right. So if you're getting constant heart rate measurements in the morning or from your devices that are lower than your baseline, this is awesome. This means your body is recovering well. It is a great opportunity for a hard workout, extra time on your feet, more active calories burnt during the day, or maybe even doing something a little bit more mentally challenging, like taking on a task or starting a new project or brainstorming. You're likely to have the energy that you need to do all of the fun active things when your heart rate has recovered. If it's a bit higher than your baseline, it might be time to take a bit of a rest, because that means something was challenging you during the night and you need a little more time to recover, maybe before hitting that workout again, or for, planning an extensive day in your business. So let's talk about all of the things that can affect your heart rate so you know what might be a contributing factor, or if we want to lower our resting heart rate, how we can put strategic biohacks into place in order to do that. So, things that you cannot control that affect your resting heart rate include age. So as we age, our resting heart rate will generally start to creep up. So that is something you can't control and something you might notice over time. Gender is actually something else that affects your resting heart rate. Females on average have a higher resting heart rate than males. So this is really interesting to know, especially if you're like me and you're always comparing to your husband and you're just like, what the heck? Why are our values so different? Well, just biologically, we are different. Other things you can't control that affect your heart rate: if you are sick, your body is likely going to have a higher resting heart rate as it is, recovering and getting healthy again. Your hormone cycle, specifically, if we're talking to anyone that has an active menstrual cycle. So we know that your hormones fluctuate throughout the month, meaning we have rises in estrogen and progesterone and falls at different times during the month. And this can actually really affect your resting heart rate. So if you're tracking over time, what you might notice is that your resting heart rate is higher from ovulation to the first day of your period. That's in your last 2 weeks. Your resting heart rate is actually higher. So what this means is your body's recovery can be challenged. I can do a whole nother podcast episode on this, but this is a really good clue that we need to be taking it a little easier on our workouts and making sure we're getting much more rest during this phase as our body is challenged by the extra or the change in hormones that are happening. Snoring can actually affect your resting heart rate as it, creates a pressure on your heart rate. So snoring is something that we can't always control, and pregnancy is also something that can affect your heart rate. So these are things that just, are completely out of our control that affect what your resting heart rate sits at. But don't worry, I've got a ton of things you can control, and I'm going to divide them into 2 categories. Category number 1, are going to be things that affect it over the long term. So meaning if you work on these, you might not see the effects of them for many days to come. And category number 2 are things that affect it daily, meaning things that you can literally start doing tonight that will affect how your heart rate fluctuates during the night and how recovered you feel tomorrow. So let's start with the long-term changes. So your fitness level has a ton to do with your heart rate. The fitter you are, and specifically cardiovascular fitness, so doing like, spin bike or running or HIIT training, this does tend to have a better effect on resting heart rate. But the fitter you are, the lower your resting heart rate is, because your body, your heart is more efficient at pumping blood. It doesn't need to pump as often, right? Certain health conditions can definitely affect your heart rate. So, getting your body in a healthy place and talking to your doctor and working through those things can affect your heart rate. Obviously, certain medications will affect your heart rate. Your body size is something that will affect your heart rate. So those individuals that carry extra body weight, the extra body weight can actually restrict blood flow through the arteries. So if that is something that you're wanting to work on, actually being a lower body fat percentage can decrease your resting heart rate. Obviously, to a certain extent, if your body fat is too low, that acts as a stressor on your body and your resting heart rate will go back up. So it's finding that really healthy body weight that works for you. If you are a smoker, smoking absolutely affects your resting heart rate. It drives it up. So if you are a smoker and are looking to decrease your resting heart rate, you'll want to quit that. Long-term stress that goes unchecked absolutely wreaks havoc on your heart rate. If you have a poor diet that is full of processed foods, and like I've done a whole bunch of episodes on whole foods and what you can eat instead and swaps like that, but your diet definitely has an effect on your heart rate. The more whole foods, healthy fats, lean proteins, vegetables, all of those kind of things will help reduce inflammation in your body and reduce heart rate. And the other thing you can't control might be depending on where you live. So elevation, meaning how high from sea level you are, actually can affect your heart rate as well. Now, if we're talking about changing your heart rate on a day-to-day basis and optimizing how your body and your recovery works, let's start biohacking you, because these tips I have coming up are things that on a day-to-day basis will have an effect on your resting heart rate. Number one is going to be your pre-bedtime routine. If you are staring into a screen and you're watching a show that is stimulating your brain, your dopamine, and it's causing your body to stay alert, or maybe you're scrolling Instagram and getting constant dopamine hits and you're not going through a proper wind down, this can actually cause your heart rate to stay elevated into sleep. Like think about watching a scary movie before bed and then, going off to bed. Your heart rate and your body and your brain do not have time to really customize and get ready for sleep. So making sure your bedtime routine includes a wind down activity in at least the half hour to 45 minutes before bed, something that is non-stimulating, low light, something that allows your body to relax, is really going to affect what your heart rate does while you sleep. Biohack number 2, your circadian rhythm. So we've talked about this before. That basically means your body wanting to follow the 24-hour clock. Our bodies like repetition and they like doing the same thing at the same time because that's what we were designed to do. So one of the things that can really mess with your evening heart rate is going to bed at different times every single night. Like one night you go to bed at 9, then 11, and then 10, and then 1, and it's all over the place. This can really affect your body's ability to use its natural hormone cycles, its natural temperature drops to have really high quality sleep. So if you find that you're waking up feeling groggy all the time, one of the reasons might be because your bedtime is constantly fluctuating. Now, obviously, in an ideal world, you'd want to go to sleep at the same time, plus or minus half an hour. So think of an hour bedtime window every single night. But this isn't always realistic. We just want to do the best that we can to pick a time that works best for us, because it actually does have a massive effect on your heart rate and how recovered you feel the next day. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that just coming up in a bit, all about what actually happens with our heart rate during the night if you go to bed at different times. So another thing that can affect your heart rate are stimulants like coffee and tea. If you have coffee or tea too close to bed, it actually stimulates your heart rate to speed up. And in order to feel recovered and refreshed the next day, we need your heart rate to drop, and ideally drop as much as possible while you are asleep. So if you're taking stimulants like coffee or black tea after 2 p.m., and the closer to bed they get, the more of an impact it has, this is definitely going to prevent your heart rate from recovering during the night and having you wake up feel refreshed. This one, biohack number 4, is not going to be everyone's favorite, but alcohol actually has a significant impact on your recovery and your resting heart rate. It jacks your heart rate up. Even if you have alcohol as early as 6 p.m. and you go to bed at 11, it has an impact on your heart rate. I've actually seen certain reports that say that it can take up to 3 days for your heart rate and sleep to fully recover after drinking alcohol before bed. So if this is something, maybe your body's in a stressed out state, if you're fighting off, a bit of a cold, or you had a really intense workout, or if you have a really important work week coming up, it might be an idea to skip the alcohol that week so that you can have a fully rested sleep. I know it feels, and some people tell me that they sleep so much better when they have a glass of wine, but the fact is, the only reason it feels like you're sleeping better is because your brain is being sedated. You're not actually experiencing the proper effects of sleep, and when your brain comes out of that sedation, you're actually much more easily able to be woken up. So the rest of your sleep is disturbed. So not only are you missing out on quality sleep, but your heart rate is up, so you're not recovering during the sedated part of your sleep you're actually getting. So if that is something that you are working on and you're feeling groggy in the morning and you're getting those energy drop-offs during the day, it might be time to check in if that alcohol consumption you're having in the evenings is more of a hindrance than it is a help. All right, next biohack. Intense training can actually really affect your resting heart rate. Now, this isn't always a bad thing because this is called a hormetic stressor. So what that basically means is when we put our bodies under a little bit of mild stress, we actually get stronger. So think about going to the gym and doing a bicep curl. Naturally, that's a stress on our bicep, right? There's muscle tears that happen in order for it to rebuild and be stronger. We actually want this to happen because that makes us stronger. So what you're actually going to notice is on days of intense training, maybe it was a really intense cardio day, or you lifted weights and it was, a new weight, or you did some new reps and it was challenging you. Intense training is actually going to cause an increase in resting heart rate. Now, this is not always a bad thing. This can mean your body is growing and changing, but if your heart rate never has a chance to recover, meaning it always stays elevated because you're constantly training, you might actually be leading to overtraining in which your body never gets a chance to recover, and then your workouts are no longer as effective. So, intense training can definitely higher your heart rate. I know on days where I do like a really hard strength training workout and I'm really sore the next day, I will notice a definite jump in resting heart rate on the night right after my workout. And honestly, if it's a really good workout, like I really worked really hard, it might even be a couple of nights after. So training not only affects your heart rate that way, meaning, if your body's recovering from your workout, your heart rate will stay higher, but if you do your workouts and your training within 2 to 3 hours of the time you fall asleep, this can actually affect your heart rate as well. So when you think about exercising, your heart rate goes up, your cortisol and your adrenaline levels go up, and your body temperature goes up. These are all things that do not lead to a restful sleep, right? So, if your adrenaline and your cortisol is going up, that's stress. So that's going to bring your heart rate up even more. And, having a high heart rate, it takes your body time to recover from a workout. So you want to make sure you have adequate space between the end of your workout and your sleep for your body to fully recover. Now, when you work out, you probably also warm up, you get a little sweaty. This is normal during your workouts. However, if your temperature is staying elevated and you're working out too close to bed, what happens is you don't get proper melatonin production. And melatonin is the hormone that signals the onset of sleep, like, hey, let's go, time to have a good sleep. It helps with high quality sleep. If your body temperature is elevated, you don't get proper melatonin release. So this affects your sleep as well. So if you're having workouts that are running into, an hour before bed, hour and a half before bed, even 2 hours before bed, it might be worthwhile rescheduling your workouts for a week and seeing if that makes a difference. The next biohack is all about your meal. So when we eat a large meal, especially one that is complicated to digest, high in protein, a lot of carbohydrates, a really dense meal, what happens is our digestive system needs to kick on to digest it, right? Naturally, we have a small rise in heart rate and our body spends that time digesting. Well, if you eat right before you go to bed or within, the 2 hours before going to bed, your body is giving energy to digestion instead of recovery. So what might happen is if you eat that meal before bed, instead of having your heart rate drop and allowing your body to recover, it's spending all that energy digesting. And this is just not going to be effective for allowing you to recover, because if you're digesting for the first 3 hours of your sleep, that is 3 hours you're not spending recovering your body and your brain for the next day, right? So what we're looking at, if you must eat before bed, keep it something very small and very light. But ideally, I always recommend at least 3 hours between dinner and between our bedtime. Now, I sometimes go to bed at 8:30 or 9, so this can be a challenge. So I'm obviously having to plan ahead, meaning like, okay, if I'm going to bed at 9 tonight, I need to be wrapping up dinner by 6. So putting a little forethought into your planning will definitely help with this. The next biohack: hydration. If you are not drinking enough water, you are going to see an increase in heart rate. So we want our blood volume, that means the amount of blood we have, to stay high, right? So we need to make sure we are hydrated, because if we are dehydrated, our blood volume can decrease. And what that means is your heart has to pump more times to get that smaller amount of blood around. So we want to keep hydrated. That means drinking plenty of water throughout the day. I know for me, I aim to drink about 2 liters. I think that's 64 ounces per day at minimum. And this is kind of my baseline. And you can always just tell, honestly, there's no perfect amount of water for everyone. Like, the 80 ounces or 100, whatever it is. Here's the quick test. When you go pee, look in the toilet. If your pee is yellow, you could probably use a couple more glasses of water. If it is very pale yellow or clear, you're hydrated. You don't need to be drinking any more water. It's honestly the simplest way to tell. There's no calculations or math or formula. Just go by that. It's super easy. So are you staying hydrated? Because being hydrated will help your heart rate stay lower while you recover. 2 more biohacks to go in this section: elevated body temperature and humidity. So this goes kind of back to exercise, but if you're in a really warm environment, or you're exercising before bed, or maybe you have a sauna, this elevated body temperature will actually bring your heart rate up. So we want to make sure that you are cooling down in the hours before bed. So this means resisting that temptation in the winter to pile on blankets and pile on jackets and stuff like that, but instead let your body naturally cool down. This will let your heart rate drop. It'll also really help boost melatonin production, which is going to help you sleep wonderfully. Okay, we're getting into our very last biohack here. We're talking about the thoughts, emotions, and stress, maybe even excitement that you are experiencing. So one of the biggest reasons why our resting heart rates are so high is because our body is under stress. We spend too much of our day doing and being productive and worrying and stressing and, being stuck as a human doing, and never really taking that time to feel and unwind and be present. Stress increases resting heart rate. So for example, when I was actually moving houses back in July, the whole month leading, or maybe it was even longer, month and a half leading up to the move, my brain, we were thinking about where are we going to find our next place to live? How long it's going to take us to move? Are we going to be able to do it on time? What about this? What about that? Moving is one of those very stressful events. So I actually saw a very noticeable increase in my resting heart rate for the whole 6 weeks leading up to the move. It was fantastic. It's a biohacker to watch in action. Not that I wanted a higher resting heart rate, but from fascination standpoint, I was like, this is so cool. And within a week of settling into our new home, my resting heart rate dropped back down. So even though I was eating well enough before bed, and I was keeping my exercise before bed, and I wasn't drinking alcohol, and I was on time with my bedtime routine, and I was, staying calm before bed, I was doing all of the right things, that mental stress I was carrying about the upcoming move significantly impacted my body's ability to properly recover. It was absolutely fascinating to see. So one of the best things that you can do if you find that your heart rate is just not relaxing, or you've got a lot on your brain, is to do things to unwind. Take some time, talk things out, get a coach that can help you work through some of your thoughts, or, see a therapist. There are so many amazing avenues that you can explore to really help you manage stress, including all of the biohacks. You can always just reach out to me if you're like, hey, I need some help, because I work with my clients on stuff like that all the time. We can schedule in a quick consult and I can help you figure out how we can bring your stress down with biohacks so that you can be more productive in your business. But I've got a ton of podcast episodes on that too. So definitely check that out. But your thoughts and your emotions, even if it's good excitement or bad stress, can definitely affect your heart rate. So I hope you have found this information on heart rate, specifically resting heart rate, as fascinating as I have given you what your resting heart rate is, how it affects your recovery, how you can track your average resting heart rate to see if you are under stress or your body's under stress, or if you are rocking and ready to go for the next day. I've given you a ton of things that you can do to help lower your resting heart rate and make sure you're recovering during the sleeping time so that you can have a really killer day the next day and feel really clear and sharp and energized. And I hope that has been really helpful. So what I would love for you to do is head over to my Instagram account. It's instagram.com/Tanessa Shears. I'll make sure I leave a link in the description and follow me on there. And then I want you to message me and tell me specifically what you are going to do to help increase the recovery time during your sleep. And I would love to know, what's your resting heart rate now? And what are you going to do to start making sure that you are getting the recovery that you need during sleep? I hope you have an absolutely fantastic, very well-rested week, and I will see you next time. Bye. Ready to begin each day feeling energized and focused? I'd love to work with you one-on-one. In my Becoming Limitless program, you're going to learn how to optimize your brain and body with science and biohacking so you can be highly productive and grow your business faster. Join me over at TanessaShears.com/work with me. I'll see you there.